the edge from Penn State.
Yeah, I put him there because I think that Dennis-Sutton is going to be a significant riser this year. He was very productive this last season, 8.5 sacks, 13 tackles for loss as the secondary rusher on Penn State's defense. But I think that what is really intriguing about him is just seeing all the tools that he has. He is so explosive out of the gate. He has a tremendous first step. He's super long. He's super bendy, but he's still been putting it all together. He's still been improving year by year. I'm really glad that he came back to school because he would have gotten lost in the mix of a really deep edge class in 2025. Instead, he gets to be probably the premier player in the 2026 NFL draft. I think that like we're doing right now, for anyone who's been tracking the 2025 draft, what we're doing right now with Shamar Stewart, where everybody's going to watch the film and they didn't have a ton of great production from him, but everybody's drooling over the traits and he's going to, he tested really well at the combine. That has driven his stock up to the point where he is going to be a top 10 pick. I think that the Deni Dennis-Sutton is going to have that same type of an ascension, and it's going to start this year with even more production than the 8.5 sacks that he had this past season.
You know why he didn't have double-digit sacks this year?
Abdul Carter.
Because he had potentially and arguably the best overall player in this year's draft that was on the opposite side of him. Joe, he won a lot of battles. I mean, look, I don't think he's the number one player in the country, right? Like you could have made the argument that Abdul Carter was okay last year. Like you could easily make that, that battle. But he got a lot of one-on-one battles, and he won a lot of them. The reason he didn't get to a lot of those sacks is because the guy in front of him or on the opposite side beat him there. Now he is the vocal point. The reason I had him at 4 was because, listen, I know that the production is there. I'm interested to see what he does without Abdul Carter, right? Like because he's going to be the vocal point, I still think he has a massive year. I still think he's going to be fantastic. You said one thing about him that was really interesting to me. You called him, what was it, bendy?
Very flexible, very bendy. That's what we look for.
You know what's interesting about him? I feel like he's very bendy in the running game. Not so much. I mean, in the past game, yes. I've never seen a guy use pass rush moves to get off blocks in the running game. It's really interesting to watch him against the run. Now, here's the thing, too. Both of them, for what it's worth, Abdul Carter and him, was probably the best edge duo in the country last year. And I felt like Dennis-Sutton, it got lost in the sauce when Abdul Carter would move around, that a lot of teams would try to run right at Dennis-Sutton in the production that he did have there. I think there's something to be said about teams like, hey, are we going to run to Abdul Carter's side or are we going to run to him? And he locked it down. He did a really good job of maintaining when everything was being focused at his direction. So now that he doesn't have the focus in the running game, he will in the pass game or pass pro. It's going to be interesting to see how people defend him moving forward, though.
Right. The bigger part is this really applies. This question I just asked with Caleb Downs. This 1,000% applies with a defensive lineman. When you no longer have your running mate and you have a guy who's going to be a top 3 pick rushing opposite of you, how do you step up to the plate? The big question for him this year was that he was rotational the prior years, and now he was getting to start and be a main contributing defensive end on this roster. He started most of the games. He was out there for 1 million snaps, and his production went up significantly. So he already checked that box. The box that now needs to be checked is, okay, now that Abdul Carter is gone and you're going to face double teams if you start to play really well, how do you take advantage of that? Not take advantage of that. How do you step up to the plate in that situation? He needs to be prepared for the added pressure on his shoulders. And if he is able to battle through that adversity, he is going to justify his placement here and also justify the hype for him as a draft prospect and as one of the best defensive linemen in the country.
He very well could be. I will say this. There's one thing about being a running, like you mentioned, a running mate for somebody that is potentially the number one. He's not going to be the number one overall pick, but should be.
No.
The reason I had him at 4 was because Mateo Uyunglele, every time I looked up for Oregon, he did get the sack for them, right?
Right.
It's not a shot at Dennis-Sutton. He is a fantastic player. But now that the spotlight is on you, as we've been mentioning here, how do you perform? That would be the big question. All right.